In 1969, I moved to Boston from Missouri. I was subletting an apartment for the summer while I was looking for a teaching job. And a friend of mine who was the gallery director at a university in Cambridge gave me a job on Sundays to work as like a greeter. I was to welcome people into the gallery. And I would only been there about 5 days when I had my first day at that work. And I was sitting there in the gallery, and this man came in, and he was very different than the other patrons that had walked through. He was very dramatic, and he went on and on about the way the sculpture show was shown. He kept saying, I need to talk to the person who curated this exhibit. I need to talk to the designer. And he was just, I didn't like him. But I was brand new to this city. I didn't know anyone, and I wanted to be polite. So I talked to him, and we didn't have much of a conversation because I wanted to get rid of him. I wanted to get him out of there because he was so mad about the way this show was being shown. And finally he left, and I kind of ignored it. I didn't worry about it. Well, at 5 o'clock that evening, when it was time to close, I'll never forget it. The gallery has big glass doors, and I was out using it had a really dramatic gold lock, and I was closing the door. I was locking the door, and there was a hand on my shoulder, and I turned around. It was this guy, and he just took charge of me. He said, "Come, I want you to come with me to my lab." And I didn't even really know who he was, and I was very scared. And he said, "Oh, it's okay. I'm a visiting fellow at this university. I have my own physics lab. I want to show you what I do there." And I didn't want to go. I really didn't. I was very scared, but I also was kind of shy. I was afraid of him. So I followed him, and we went to this lab, and we got inside the lab, and there were all these bubbler glass bottles. I felt like I was in some kind of movie, truly. It didn't seem real to me, but it was real. And I said, what do you do here? And he said, "I'm working on a physics project. There is a magical water in New England that can help you with mysteries." And I went, "What?" I mean, it sounded crazy to me. I said, and this is a university that was a very conservative school. I said, "You're doing this for your as part of this university work?" He said, "Oh, no, this is my own work." And he showed me a book, and the book had his name on it, and it was, I don't remember what the title was, but his name was on the book, that it published like a dissertation or something. So I knew that it was real. And I was so uncomfortable. I wanted to get out of there. And it finally, after maybe not long, 5 or 10 minutes, we left. And on our way walking out the building, he passed his car. And so we got to his car first before I was going to get to my car down the street. And I saw on the car, it had his name, and it was a temporary permit with the same name that he had given me that was on the book. And so I knew that was a real person. The permit, I don't know where the permit was for, what it was for, but he had the same name. So I couldn't wait to get away from him. So I left, and I started walking down, and he was staring at me so peculiarly. But anyway, I left, and I went back to my apartment. And I'd only been to this apartment that I was subletting for the summer. I'd only been there 5 days. And it was very hot. It's really humid in Boston. This was in July in 1969. And so I remember I took off all my clothes, but I took off all my underwear. I remember this because I was sweating, but I wasn't ready to take my bath yet. So I still had on this like gauzy dress. And one thing that I had to do when I rented this apartment was allow the woman down below who lived, the neighbor, allow her to use the telephone, because that was the arrangement that I had. I got this apartment at a really good deal until I found a teaching job. It was just for the summer. And she had been, during that week, she'd come up a few times to use the phone. She was a lovely woman. It was no big deal. So I heard a knock on the door, and I said, come in. I assumed it was her. I didn't know anybody else. And I looked up. I was sitting on the bed when I said, come in. The bedroom was like right near the front door. In walked this guy that had been there that day. And I was really, really, really scared and shocked. And I said, what are you doing here? And he said, I came to see your art. And I didn't really know what to think. I think I had told him, now that I think about it, I told him that I was an artist, because when I'd had that conversation, that brief conversation in that gallery in the daytime, I told him I was an artist looking for a teaching job. And he said, yes, I've come to look at your slides. And I said, okay, please, go out the room down to where the living room is. It's in a big, it's brownstones, or it wasn't a brownstone, apartments in Boston. It's like a shingled house. I forgot what the name of it is. It has a long flat. So the room that I was in was closer to the door. The living room was down here. So I said, go down the living room. And he said, I want to see your slides now. And I happened to be looking at my slides. I was looking for a teaching job. And he took the case. It was a metal case that had like real sharp edges. And he took the case, and the rest was so horrible. And it was what took place next. I can't even really talk about it. It was the ugliest, most horrible thing. I really thought I was going to die. It went on for hours. This guy punched me, raped me. He did a lot of things. And I went in and out of what I call a zone of consciousness. It probably wasn't. I don't think I fainted or anything. It was more like I was in a place of such fear that I was really going to die. That after this it was bizarre. He chanted, he told me the end hadn't come. He kept saying it over and over, the end hasn't come. And finally, I would say he was on top of me. I'm guessing this, but it felt like an hour or more. It felt like a long, long time. And finally I said, if you want to kill me, you just cut me, because I'll bleed to death, because I take anticoagulants. And he jumped up and said, no, I don't want to kill you. And it was like something snapped in his head, and he picked up his glasses that were on the floor, and he left. And I had blood all over me. I mean, it was really a mess. And the woman that lived downstairs had, earlier that day, she had told me she was going to bring me some food, a plate of food from her mother's that she was going to. She came in late at night and found me, and eventually I got to the hospital. And the next day, when I was in the hospital, and I was out of it. I don't even remember getting there or anything. I had a blood clot, by the way, because I have a sensitivity to that. And the police came to that hospital room. And when they came in, this was the very time when the astronauts were landing on the moon, right when they came to the hospital. And they came in my room, and the only thing they really cared about was moving the TV, to see about the moon landing. And there was all this joyous ruckus, laughter, and happiness, and loud noises in the hospital rooms and outside of the room. And the police, they started, they took their time, and they'd ask me all about what happened, and I told them. And they said, if you're involved in a sexual crime in these here parts, these were the exact words, because I told them I was looking for a college teaching job or a high school job, an art job, teaching job. They said, if you're involved in a sexual crime in these here parts, you won't be hired. And I just lost it. I mean, it was like, I didn't do this crime. And they went back to looking at the moon landing, and I remember thinking I was in the darkest place I had ever been in my lifetime. It was like a hole so large. And when they told me that I wouldn't get a job, I just shut the door. And I am not kidding you. For 10 years, I never opened that door. I couldn't. We didn't have rape crisis centers help. There was no help for rape. There was no help. That I did have one psychologist did help me in the hospital. She did her best. But the doctors, I went before all these doctors because I had a blood clot, and they asked me, I told them my story, and they said, this is a trauma, you've been through a trauma, you'll get over it, blah, blah. Well, I didn't get over it. And for the next 10 years, I led a double life. In fact, I've written a book about it. It's called It Had to Happen This Way. And it took me, I went into such depression and such horror that and I lived that for 10 years. I didn't get well until I was 40 years old is when I started getting help, from psychologists, and it took me about another 5 years to get well. That's the way it was back then. Today, so many women, children, and men are still suffering in silence with this horrible epidemic. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 71 men experience sexual assault in their lifetime. Women between the ages of 18 and 24 are at the highest risk, especially on college campuses throughout the United States. I want to send a message to every survivor of sexual assault. Don't let anyone silence your voice. You have the right to be heard, and you have the right to be believed. It is not enough to condemn campus sexual assault. We need to end it. As president, I will fight to make sure every campus offers every survivor the support she needs, and will make sure those services are comprehensive, confidential, and coordinated. Sexual assault survivors include men and the transgender community. Rape is a crime wherever it happens, and schools have an obligation. I think it's both a legal obligation and a moral obligation to protect every student's right to get an education free from discrimination and free from fear. We need to shore up services for survivors, as well as bolster prevention efforts to change attitudes associated with violence. The issue is a lot bigger than a single conversation at a freshman orientation. Hillary has led efforts to address violence against women her entire career. As First Lady, Hillary supported the creation of the Department of Justice's Office on Violence Against Women. she cast a global spotlight on the issue in her historic 1995 Beijing speech, where she denounced violence against women as a clear violation of human rights. As senator, Hillary co-sponsored the 2005 reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. Additionally, Hillary introduced the CARE Act twice to ensure that rape and incest victims had access to emergency contraception in hospital emergency rooms. In response to the spike in reports of sexual assault cases in the military, she introduced legislation to make emergency contraception available to servicewomen. As Secretary of State, Hillary rallied the international community to take collective action to end violence against women. She drew attention to the use of rape as a weapon of war and spearheaded a UN resolution that established guidelines for an international response to sexual assault in war-torn areas. Less than every 2 minutes, someone is sexually assaulted in the United States. It affects hundreds of thousands of Americans, men and women. There are so many different kinds of sexual assault. There's sexual harassment, stalking, adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse, using technology to hurt others, sexual exploitation of the helping professionals, multiple perpetrator sexual assault, elder abuse, sexual assault of people with disabilities, and prisoner rape and military sexual trauma. When I was raped, there wasn't any help, but there is now. This is very important. You can call or email RAINN, RAINN. They have a 24/7 national sexual hotline. The number is 800-656-HOPE. Hey, lovely women, it's time to move on through the forest. Let's see if we can find where the path to awareness and the path to the presidency converge. Do the two paths come together? Yes, they do. Well, this should be interesting.